Hi everyone, my name is Tuan. I'm a PhD student at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Today I will be presenting payment channels under network congestion. This work is done in collaboration with Haofan Zheng, Peter Alvaro, and Owen Arden. Everyone should be familiar with how on-chain transactions work. Alice wants to send Bob some money. She will include this amount in a transaction and publish this to the network. A miner can then include her transaction in a block and append it to the end of the chain. This is slow because Bob would have to wait for some number of confirmations before being able to spend his money. And it's expensive because every on-chain transaction requires a transaction fee. To avoid these issues, Alice and Bob can make use of a payment channel which allows them to transact off-chain. To construct a payment channel, Alice and Bob agrees on some initial deposit amount and create a payment channel contract and publish this contract to the network. Once this contract's on the chain, Alice and Bob can send money to each other by simply signing messages. This is fast because payments are instant, and it's cheap because off-chain transactions does not require transaction fees. As an example, suppose Alice wants to pay Bob $90. Alice will construct a message that includes the payment amount, the transaction counter, as well as the balances of both parties after the payment has been made. Now, this transaction counter allows both parties to keep track of the latest transaction between the two of them. So that when Bob wants to send Alice some money, he will construct a similar message, but increments this transaction counter. When it comes time to close the channel and withdraw money, Bob will send his latest state to the contract. The contract will check and verify this state, and if it is valid, will transition to the state and set a dispute period after which Bob can withdraw his money. This dispute period is important because if Bob were malicious and submits an old state that benefits him, Alice will have time to notice this and submit a dispute transaction with a newer state. Because this state is newer and valid, the contract will transition to the state and allow Alice to withdraw her $65. We note that it is crucial that Alice's dispute transaction make it to the contract within this dispute period. But this can be challenging if the network is experiencing congestion. Over the past several months, blockchains like Ethereum and Bitcoin have seen an increase in usage. This is due to the fact that trading is more accessible through platforms like Robinhood or PayPal. And in a blockchain like Ethereum, the matter is even worse because of the popularity of things like NFTs and meme coins. So this increase in usage in turn caused the cost of sending transactions on these chains to rise drastically. And the high cost of sending transactions in turn affect the security of payment channels. Going back to our example, suppose the network is congested and the transaction fee is $70. Bob now performs the same attack, and Alice has two options: to dispute or not dispute. If she chooses to not dispute, she can wait until the network becomes uncongested and claim $10 from the contract. Or she can choose to dispute, but spending $70 to send the transaction results in her losing $5 out of her own pocket. So the best way forward for Alice would be to simply let Bob perform the attack so that she can claim $10 later on. This is a huge issue, and previous works have focused on ensuring that Alice's dispute transaction will always be able to make it to the contract. Works like Watchtower and Monitoring Service allows delegating the dispute process to a third party, who will make the dispute on Alice's behalf if she's not online. However, a successful dispute does not account for the high cost of the transaction fee. One way that we can approach this is by setting a large dispute period, one that would encapsulate the period of congestion. However, it is hard to determine how long the period of congestion is, and if we set the dispute period for too long, it would cause the funds to be locked up for a long time. Our solution to this is simple. We require that Bob, when making the transaction to close the channel, he will also include a deposit amount. This deposit would then be used to reimburse Alice if her dispute is successful. Going back to our example, Alice, when sending this dispute transaction, does not have to worry about the transaction fee, and since her state is newer, she will be reimbursed for that transaction fee and be able to claim her $65 from the contract. On the other hand, Bob now not only loses the transaction fee, he also loses the deposit. The changes that we make to a standard payment channel contract are simple. First, to close the contract, we require that the closing party includes a deposit amount. Now, the contract will check whether or not this deposit amount is sufficient to cover the cost of sending a dispute transaction. In our Solidity implementation, this check is done by comparing the deposit amount with the block's base fee, which determines how expensive it is to send a dispute transaction. When Alice wants to dispute, she will simply call the update function. And because the state that she sent is newer, the dispute will be considered successful and the deposit amount will be credited to her balance. Now, when it comes time to withdrawing, if both parties are honest, the deposit will simply be returned to the closing party. As part of our evaluation, we implemented our payment channel in Solidity and evaluated the cost to execute each of its functions. Because the changes that we made to the contract to enable deposits are minimal, the overhead is low. This table shows a comparison with a similar contract on the Raiden network. We note that the cost to close the channel is high. This is because the contract not only has to check and validate the deposit amount, it also has to update the state with the one that's included in the closing transaction. As part of our future work, we plan to investigate further how network congestion affects other scaling solutions. In Ethereum, there are 3 ways to scale off-chain: state channels, plasma, and rollups. In this work, we've shown that payment channels and instantiation of state channels are vulnerable against execution of fork attacks under network congestion. Plasma and optimistic rollups chose the approach of setting a long dispute period of 7 days. However, in the past, Ethereum has experienced network congestion that has lasted weeks up to months, so we suspect that these approaches are vulnerable when the network is congested for a long period of time. ZK rollups, or zero-knowledge rollups, we suspect that this approach is secure because every off-chain transaction essentially has a validity proof attached to it, and this proof is valid once it's seen on-chain, so after 2 rollup blocks, after which a party can safely spend the money. In conclusion, payment channels allow us to transact fast and cheap off-chain. In this work, we've shown that network congestion has a direct impact on the security of these payment channels. Prior works have focused on ensuring that disputes are always successful, but neglects the cost of making these disputes. We propose a simple redesign of payment channel contracts to include a security deposit that can be used to reimburse the disputing party if they are successful. This ensures fairness for both parties. Thank you for your time. That's the end of my talk.